Good morning, everybody. Excuse me, I'm doing this on YouTube this time, so there's no live feed. I had decided to do something on newspaper writing without thinking about how difficult it is to talk about newspaper writing. And so I thought, well, I'll start with the ABCs of news writing, or who, what, when, where, why, how, who cares. And then I realized that I didn't learn newspaper writing in a 20-minute seminar. I learned it over a couple of years when I was getting half of a journalism degree at the University of Anchorage in Alaska. And there's no way that I can present everything I want to present in a concise manner in 20 minutes or less. And so now you know what you're going to be learning about all through 2021. So if you don't want to know anything about newspaper writing whenever I talk, that's a good time when you can flake out and not attend a lecture. So anyway, I'm starting with the First Amendment and legal cases. And you're all probably going, why? But it does actually impact not just news writing, but every writer that publishes everything, because in America, we do have freedom of the press, and we are probably the country that has the most freedom of the press of any nation in the world. Possibly there are a few others, but not many. And so what I wanted to do was read you the First Amendment. And it says, Congress shall make no law respecting establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging freedom of speech, or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. Now, why is this freedom of the press and the First Amendment so incredibly important? And I'm putting this up for people to review. And it's because without freedom of the press, you don't have a functional free society. And that includes, of course, all the other writing we do too, but it's particularly important for news writing. And I like what Supreme Court Justice Hugo Black had to say about it. The press is to serve the governed. That's you and me, not the governors. And that was from the United States Supreme Court Justice in New York Times versus the United States in 1971. And freedom of the press is incredibly important. It's why we have an open and democratic society. And it's critical to any government that's not going to end up being run by a dictator or a near dictator. And it's what sets us apart, say, from countries like Saudi Arabia, where they don't have freedom of the press, or Iran, where they don't have freedom of the press, or Russia or China, where none of them have freedom, or North Korea. We have freedom of the press, and it's incredibly important, whether it is the broadcaster standing there in front of the camera, or whether it's a newscaster sitting in a radio station, or whether or not it's the reporter that's out there getting information and doing the hard work, that we do have freedom of the press, because that's really the reason we have it in the Constitution, is to keep for a free and democratic society. And I'm sorry, my dog is barking in the background, but that's what happens during COVID days. And the reality is that a trained journalist, and many of the people today who are portraying themselves as journalists are not trained. They don't adhere to standards. And what we consider news is no longer actually news, because it doesn't adhere to any of the standards that I was trained in, and maybe some of the others of you here were trained in. And we're going to get into some of that in the next few times that I lecture. I was going to say in the next few weeks, but we're going down for a couple of 2 or 3 weeks due to the holidays. But we can have more discussions about it here today. One of my concerns is, in our society today, We can have like a shock jock conspiracy theorist such as Alex Jones, who has millions and millions of followers who consider him credible, more credible than Pulitzer Prize winning journalists who do the really hard work. And I pulled up one guy, Brian M. Rosenthal of the New York Times, did an expose of the New York taxi industry where there was predatory lending going on, people were getting rich, and they were destroying cab drivers. And his journalism, he got a Pulitzer Prize for it in 2020, I believe, and his journalism was so in-depth and so accurate that not only was it a very impactful story, but it got state, federal, and local law enforcement and legislation to go through to protect people. And so there were sweeping reforms as a result of this. And these are the people that we need to be paying attention to, is the actual journalists who are trained, who do the hard work, who ask the hard questions, and go through some of the processes that I'm going to be talking about in the future. And finally, it occurred to me that this is probably all I'm going to be talking about in 2021, because it's not an easy subject to cover, and it's something that you should know about as a writer when you get your material published. And also, if you're going to write a little fake news story to go in your article or a little fake news story to go in your book, it's important to know how to actually do this and what would and would not be acceptable under the First Amendment for a news story to contain. The other thing we're going to talk about is the difference between news and a conspiracy theory. We've had conspiracy theories probably forever. And I was just talking with somebody yesterday who's a clinical psychologist who's been studying this. And the reason that we have conspiracy theories is people want something that will help them make sense of their world. And it doesn't matter if it's the most crazy thing out there. And I've been sucked into a few myself. It's a way for people to both get a dopamine response to the brain and to make sense of stuff that doesn't make sense to them within their own bias structure, and we all have our own bias structure. And so a conspiracy theory, however, is not news. News is something that you can go out and investigate and report on using some of the structures we're going to be talking about in the future: who, what, when, where, why, how. And does it matter? Who the hell cares? Because if nobody cares, it really isn't a news story. But you need to be able to tamp down the facts. You need to be able to use the ABCs of news. Is it accurate, etc.? And a conspiracy theory, when you analyze it from a news perspective, always falls apart because people can't answer those questions, not in a way that can be nailed down, not in a way that happens with resources as well. Somebody said, he said, who said? And then when you find the who said, maybe they say I didn't say it, or they can't verify. Recently, something came up where somebody was supposed to have said something as a part of being an intelligence officer, and when you nailed it down, they were never an intelligence officer. They were a mechanic in a motor pool. And so that's the difference between a conspiracy theory, when you try and nail down all the pieces, doing, investigation, it falls apart. And actually, in a news story, if you can't nail it down, it should all fall apart too. It should never reach the light of day. But conspiracy theories have been around forever, and they've certainly been around ever since before the United States came together during the colonies. I'd like to discuss, as we go forward, what we call news literacy. We don't seem to be able to understand anymore the difference between facts, disinformation, and misinformation. And we're going to be talking more over the coming year about how to look at a news story and analyze a news story to see whether or not it's actually got something behind it. Do realize that people like the New York Times and the Washington Post and some of the BBC, Reuters, AP, the Newswires, they want 2 to 3 good news sources that can be documented and verifiable. You may never see who they are, but the reporter and usually the reporter's editor, or sometimes the reporter's editor, have this because that way they can verify their sources. So I want to teach you to be consumers of credible news. And also, if you're interested in writing for the news, learning more about what you would need to do to be an accurate reporter outside of going and getting a degree in journalism, which is a really good start. I started writing for journalism when I was a junior in high school. And then I did work for a couple of 2 or 3 newspapers, although not full-time and not, solidly, but off and on. And then I want to bring it again back to the First Amendment. There's a reason that we protect the freedom of the press. And it's because ever since Rome, and you're talking about all kinds of civilization, Rome, France, Marco in Spain, people all over the world, when they start calling the press the enemy of the people or the enemy of the nation, we know we are seeing an attempt to be a dictator, a wannabe dictator, a fascist leader, to prevent the people of the nation, the people who want democracy or to be in a representative democracy, from learning about the excesses of the ruling class. And believe me, there's always a ruling class. So it is when we hear those words that the press is the enemy of the people or the enemy of the nation, we're going to know that we're hearing a clarion call for the end of government by and for the people, no matter when in history or in what country this happens. And it happens fairly routinely. So be aware when you hear it, what you're hearing. And anyway, I am uploading a document where I'm going to have, there's going to be 2 documents. This one was not as well done. I've just got a bunch of links at the bottom about the First Amendment. And then I've got a second document that I'm going to be uploading called Landmark Freedom of the Press Cases. And it starts off with a quote by Benjamin Franklin that says, "Without freedom of thought, there can be no such thing of wisdom, and no such thing as public liberty without the freedom of speech." And Ben Franklin said that in 1722. And these landmark cases, which I'm going to put up in a PDF, begin in 1735, which is before we had a nation and before there was a Supreme Court. And not all of these cases were heard by the Supreme Court, but most of these landmark freedom of the press cases were heard by the Supreme Court. And I refer to that as the court. And you're going to say, why do I want to read all this stuff about legal documents? I thought we were talking about news writing. Well, if you're going to do news writing, you need to understand the underlying law which supports what you can and can't say as a reporter, or even who your fictional characters, what they can and can't do. And it's going to talk about the people who can't claim, you can't be the governor of a state and sue a newspaper for telling the truth. And that used to be possible to do that, but truth is now a complete defense to libel. So if you can demonstrate that you're telling the truth, you can print it. And it gets even one of my favorite cases is Hustler v. Falwell, Hustler v. Falwell, which happened in 1988, which is where the Hustler magazine, not exactly your tabletop companion for your friends and family, made some farcical statements about Jerry Falwell's mother. I think it was in an ad, as I recollect, and he sued, and the Supreme Court says you can't recover damages for intentional infliction of emotional harm unless the publication contained false statements with actual malice. And there was no actual malice, it was satire. And then the other last thing, and it may be important for those of you working with kids, is in 1988, Hazelwood School District versus, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, Kohlmeyer. Student newspapers don't get the same First Amendment protections because it's a school function. So this is both First Amendment law and juvenile law, and one of my specialties was once upon a time juvenile law. So I'm going to kind of stop here. We've got 15 minutes going in, and I'm going to try and bring in some other stuff today, not just about legal cases, because you're probably going, oh my God, this wasn't what I signed up for learning about how to write the news. But basically, your bottom line on writing news is you've got to know what's legal to say and what's not legal to say. There's a small commentary on prior restraint, which is the government can't stop you from printing the truth, even if it's inconvenient for them, through prior restraint. And that was the big case of the Pentagon Papers. That's why we can print leaked documents and the government can't stop you, is because you don't get to use prior restraint, because the people have a right to know certain things. And that is why we have freedom of the press in America. And that's why it's so important that we continue to have it, even if it's not comfortable. And frequently, I don't care if it's my ox being gored, your ox being gored, their ox being gored, somebody's always going to get a gored ox when it comes to the press and what's going on and trying to keep the government accountable to the people. Somebody's always not going to like it. That's part of the news and freedom of the press. But it's very important that we have it, and it's very important that the public have critically examined information that is different than a conspiracy theory or quote, alternative facts of today. There aren't really alternative facts. There's facts, and you can build on your facts, or there's disinformation or misinformation. So anyway, I'm going to wind it up now, and I'm going to upload this to YouTube so that you can see it, and hopefully it should be live by noon, and I will also be putting up some other material for people to look at today. And I hope you have a great holiday season, and I look forward to seeing you again in 2020. And of course, we're going to all be on here just talking with each other, even though there's not going to be any seminars going on for a few weeks. Take care. Bye-bye.